we know that categorically that pain and damage are not really good bedfellows, that there's not a very good link between these two things, that you can have lots of pain with no injury and you can have lots of injury without any pain. So there's a disconnect here which confuses people, and I think that's what I spend a lot of my time doing, is trying to make some clarity, see something clear out of the confusion of all of this.
What are you doing at the minute for work? What kind of people do you work with, and what's your interest?
Most of the work I do is teaching. So I'm sort of, a lot of the work that I'm doing is teaching healthcare professionals, doctors and physios and chiropractors and osteopaths. And then clinically, I see a mix of patients. Some patients are people who've had pain for a very long time and they're struggling doing very simple things. Other people are athletes. I've recently been working with a gymnast who's an Olympian. So we get a mixture of the people who like to go and exercise on a regular basis and go out of a weekend, and anything up to those people who are competing at international level.
Okay, and what do you teach about?
Pain. So pain. The course that I teach are no pain courses, helping people make sense of pain, which sort of comes directly from the work that we do with patients, which is trying to help people understand why pain's there and how to make sense of it, how to move beyond it. In amongst that, when pain's a really big, complex topic, so we consider ways to help people talk about their experience of pain, because we know that that can be a hard thing to get it out and to express your experience, how it affects you in your life, the psychology of pain, and most importantly, which I think we're going to touch in today, is, how do we make sense of it and get over it and start getting going again? And from a running perspective, how do we get you back to running with confidence?
Yeah, and that's the reason I wanted to bring you on specifically is because I've done a few episodes with people on different things and related to biomechanics and pathology related to running injuries and things like that. And then there's almost this big missing bit that I'd like to be able to refer people back to, where just because we have some changes in, let's say the example I mentioned we could use would be like knee arthritis, right? So you got a scan that shows some knee arthritis and then a runner's got knee pain. But there's this sort of, on top of that, whether it hurts or not, the pain side of it is this whole big, it's a massive area of I guess, intellectual inquiry. And that's what made me think of you. So I wonder if you could, what I'd like to do is try and dig into the difference between pain and damage. Because, when someone comes in to see me and they say, my knee hurts when I run, got osteoarthritis, I don't want to run anymore because I'm damaging my knee, or I'm worried I might be damaging my knee. Is that a reasonable thing to think? Are these two things connected? What's going on there?
I think the first thing to say is, and this is good news for these times. We've just been talking about how COVID's made everybody very miserable, and quite rightly so. But it's time for some good news. I think if we consider where we are at present in terms of the science of and the evidence of, well, what is pain and what does it mean for you as a runner, or for anybody really, the message is overwhelmingly liberating and positive. So I'll explain. I think in the past, we've always traditionally seen pain as something that's intrinsically linked to damage, which is the natural thing to think. I mean, I went out for a run yesterday. I got some niggly pains in my ankle as I'm running along. And the first thing instinctively that you do is think, oh, what have I done? And you visualize sort of these images, especially it's even worse when you're a healthcare professional and you've got a knowledge of anatomy. As you're running along, you visualize what's happening inside the ankle. You think about the anatomy. You think, oh, am I causing a tear? Is there, so all that catastrophizing, that worry that is so intuitive and instinctive with pain is still there when you understand the science of it. That's how strong our belief systems are about pain, and our culture, our upbringing, what our parents told us to do when we have pain, for example. These things all matter. So I think that's a really interesting point to make, is that even though you know what pain is, which we'll talk about, and it is a far more liberating and positive experience than what we used to think pain is, still I worry. I know other people who work in the industry, who work in pain science, they worry when they get pain. We immediately jump to the conclusion that something's causing harm inside there. But we know that categorically that pain and damage are not really good bedfellows, that there's not a very good link between these two things, that you can have lots of pain with no injury, and you can have lots of injury without any pain. So there's a disconnect here, which confuses people, and I think that's what I spend a lot of my time doing, is trying to make some clarity, see something clear out of the confusion of all of this, the shift in our thinking about pain.
So yeah, there's a disconnect there. So we take that example of you running yesterday and your ankle starting to hurt, and you can feel it. Why does that not indicate that you're damaging your ankle, if that's the case?
Well, for me particularly, I mean, if you think about it, we always think that, a classic case of thinking about pain would be, pain is my alarm system, pain is my warning device. It's telling me to stop. It's telling me I'm causing damage. Now, for me, with this ankle problem that I've been having, I've had that now for maybe 5 years, 6 years on and off. And we don't have an injury that will last for 5 or 6 years. So for this situation, I've had to sort of, in a way, master my thinking over this, because we know that pain is based in not injury, not damage, but perception, and particularly your perception of threat, how confident you feel, how much concern, how much anxiety you have, all of what we call technically the psychosocial factors. So how you think, how you feel, how you react, how you behave. These are the more important indicators of a problem than the anatomy, than the muscles, than the tendons. So I know for me with this ankle problem that it's not something that's causing injury or harm, because it can't be. It's been there so long. I think one of the best ways to put it is a way that one of my patients said, when she tried to understand the difference between pain that's useful and telling you that there's an injury, and pain that's actually just a bit of a nuisance. She said to me, so when my back pain started 10 years ago, when I lifted a chair at work, that was useful. That was my pain being my friend. It was saying, watch out, you've done something, so it is like your mate who's protecting you. But now, she said, 10 years later, it's become almost like that friend who refuses to leave my house party. It's 4 a.m. I'm just wanting people to go home, and they're checking out where the Jack Daniels is. And that, in a nutshell, is the issue with persistent pain, or pains that keep sort of niggling and returning and coming back. So it's less to do with harm and more to do with sensitivity.
Okay. So what do you mean by sensitivity?
Well, again, if we think about, a classic thing would be a sensitive tooth. If you think about the pain that comes with a sensitive tooth, very often there's very little in the way of harm or damage. But what's happened there is the tooth has started to almost learn how to become sore. So you're sore, but you're safe. We just need to find a way of reducing that sensitivity. And it's very similar with, if I look at my ankle, for example, I know that I continue to run on this ankle when it starts to hurt, in the confidence that I'm not doing harm. But in doing so, I sensitize it. I flick that sensitivity button back up again. And we know that pain is just like learning anything. So I sometimes say to people, if you want to get really good at French, you just have to keep learning French again and again and again. If you keep repeating something, the rule is nerves that fire together wire together. So if for me, for example, if I keep setting off that sensitive ankle, I'm going to make it more sore, but that soreness doesn't relate to harm or damage. That soreness relates to me almost becoming fluent in sensitivity.
So
It like learning French.
are you learning to feel ankle pain there? Is that
Yeah, but not in a way. I mean, the word learning might be an issue because we're not consciously, I'm not sitting
no?
there running along thinking about it, but at a subconscious level, which 88% of what our lives exist for is subconscious processing of data.
Hmm.
So as I'm running along, that sensitivity that I'm picking up from is going to return easier next time, not because
Okay.
it's causing any harm, but because it knows how to do it. Just like the more I make spaghetti bolognese, the more I don't need the recipe. It becomes sort of an instinctive learnt response. So I
Okay.
think that's one very confident thing to recall from this conversation is that pain when you're out and doing things is highly unlikely to be harm or damage, but it is a sensitivity issue,
Hmm.
and maybe the old-fashioned way of dealing with that would have been to either stop and protect and rest, which causes more problems,
Hmm.
or the other option is to do the old-fashioned thing of no pain, no gain, where we just keep sort of running through it and plow on through, and but that causes a problem again because you're just then opening those textbooks of French or
Hmm.
repeating how to make that spaghetti bolognese again.
And so then where does tissue change come into that? So like I mentioned that we could take the example of a female runner in her 60s with knee pain when she runs like 10K, and she gets an x-ray that showed like moderate osteoarthritic change in the knee joint. And then she's running this 10K and she understands what you just said. So she's, I'm making the knee more sensitive as I run, but I understand that I'm not doing damage. How can she be confident that she's not doing damage? And where would the damage fit into the actual experience of pain? Could she
Mm,
potentially make it
mm, mm.
worse? Um, and when I say worse, I suppose
You could. I mean,
sorry, go ahead.
yeah, I think there's a couple of ways to answer that question. I think the first way, I mean, I'm one of these strange people. I'm a bit weird. I wanted to be a physio from about the age of 14. So I always knew what I wanted to do as a profession, which is really strange. I meet some other physios who are like, well, are you the same, Matt? Or were
I
you a bit older
no,
when you wanted to be a physio?
no. About the time when I was around 16, I realized I wasn't good enough at football to be a professional footballer, so I had to do something else. That's when I decided to be a physio.
Well, I've never quite worked out why I had this unerring drive to be a physio. I've got a twin brother, and we're now like 45 years of age, and he still doesn't know what he wants to do.
Right.
But I was dead sure about being a physio, and actually, interestingly, to answer this question, one of my first ever experiences in physio was working with an old school physio who was like in his late 60s, coming up for retirement, had trained in the army as what they used to call in Britain the remedial gymnast. So somebody who's working with soldiers. And can you hear me okay?
Yep.
I
Yep.
think it cut off for a sec.
No, the sound has been fine. It just the video skipped a bit.
Ah, perfect. So yeah, this guy had a patient in on neck traction, which is essentially, well, one of these torture chamber type machines that they put this harness around your head and it pulls with weights the head up off your body, so it stretches your neck. And this guy was looking really, really worried, and the physio stopped the machine and said, "What are you worried about?" He said, "I feels like my head's going to fall off. Like it's going to snap off my body. It's pulling all the weight off there." And he asked him a question, which I think is really relevant for your listeners. And the question was a really weird question. He said, "Have you ever tried to remove the leg from an uncooked chicken with your bare hands?" And the bloke was like, yeah. And he said, "How easy was it?" And he said, it was impossible. In the end, I had to go and get the cleaver. This
Hmm.
is why butchers have cleavers. So, and he said, exactly. If you think of a small animal, and human beings are animals,
Hmm.
we like to think of ourselves as distinct, but we are a biomechanical moving organism, an object. And he said, look, if it takes so much to cause harm to a chicken, that you have to use a cleaver, you're a 6'4", 42-year-old human male. You're like a bear. It takes a lot. We have this notion that humans are inherently fragile and vulnerable, and we see this a lot. A lot of the evidence shows this, particularly in sport. One of the myths of working with people with pain in sport is that the athlete, the human, is a fragile, vulnerable organism that needs lots and lots of protection. And we know that actually that leads to more problems than it does solutions. So one way is to think about that. Think about how strong a chicken is, and then upscale that to you as a human being. It's
that is an interesting way to think about it.
Yeah. But it's that classic thing of, focus on what's strong, not what's wrong. And this is the problem. I know, and anyone who goes running knows that running is partly physical and partly psychological. We know that how you feel when you're running, if you feel confident and robust and strong, you run better. You run further, you run faster, you're more happy, The other way to answer that question, though, is we know, again, if you look at the data, if you look at the science, that there's a very low correlation, there's a very low link between how you look on the inside, how, for example, that lady's knee might look, the 60-year-old runner's knee that you mentioned, and actually how she is on the outside. So we can look at huge data and we can pull up statistics and we could do it that way. But I think actually from a learning point of view, maybe a better way to do it is to look at a thought experiment. So to think about two scenarios. So one scenario would be, imagine that you are like an X-Man, a superhero. You've got a superpower, and your superpower is MRI vision. So you can see the world in MRI. You can see everybody. You can see how they look on the inside. Imagine, take your MRI superpower to the finishing line of a marathon. Maybe, I don't know, in Ottawa or Toronto or London or New York. Take that MRI superpower to the finishing line of the marathon, and now think about using that MRI vision superpower to watch as people cross the finishing line. You will see, like you always do in a marathon, you'll see some people who are 75, 85, 90, 95 years of age. Some people are in their hundreds when they run marathons. And, how does their spine look with your MRI superpower? How do their discs look in their spine? What do their knee look like? Do they have any signs of arthritis or those scary words we often hear like degeneration? Of course, the answer is, yeah, they look dreadful on the inside anatomically. We know that people, you see wrinkles on the outside, you see wrinkles on the inside. So you would fully expect with your MRI superpower to see lots of damage, which we know is largely irrelevant. But age changes, normal, perfectly things that wouldn't worry a healthcare professional these days, based on the science. We will see that in people who run marathons and do it very comfortably. Then if you use your MRI superpower to go to the local pediatric hospital and go and look at like a 7-year-old girl who can't stand up from a wheelchair because she's got disabling back and leg pains, and then think about how that 7-year-old girl's body looks with MRI supervision. It's by and large, you're looking at a brand new motor car. You're looking at a human being that's anatomically perfect. So pain and injury, pain and arthritis are not necessarily as clear cut as we used to think.
And why is that? Why can you get that 90-year-old going across the finish line and you can see with your MRI vision, they've got knee arthritis, they've got back arthritis, they've got all sorts of degenerative change, but nothing hurts, and they just ran 42 kilometers. Why is that?
Yeah, well, it's a great question, and again, it's a question that's sort of puzzled people for many, many years. Those people who, you get so many situations in life when you think about pain. pain is really weird. And the more you look at pain, the more you find weird pain stories that they don't fit at all with what the textbooks taught us.
Mm-hmm.
I remember, I'm sure you did, Matt. I remember sort of as a healthcare student, as a physio student, you'd see patients and then you think, this doesn't fit with what it says in the books. These things aren't, they're not seeming to match very well. So why does that person not get pain? It's generally speaking, it comes back to what we were talking about before. It's about they have a lack of sensitivity. They have a reduced sensitivity. It's not the arthritis that's producing the pain. It's the nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
You feel the pain in the 60-year-old runner would feel the pain in the knee, but that's not where it's coming from. That's not where the sensitivity and when the sensation of pain is originating from. That human experience of pain is not produced in the knee, it's produced in the brain all times. I mean, there's never an excuse where it doesn't come from the brain.
So say that the runner, we'll go back to the runner who does have knee pain. You're saying that those changes, those arthritic changes, the pain isn't there. The pain is in the nervous system. Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, you feel the pain. That's where you feel the pain. You feel the pain in the knee, for example, but that's not the part of your body that's responsible for that sensation, for that experience. Pain is this really complex experience, which, to answer the question, why would the 90-year-old not have pain in the knee? Well, we know that pain is based in perception of threat. So, for example, for that 90-year-old, even though they have no cartilage left in their knee or knees and spine, their nervous system hasn't had that ability to learn about pain. It's not switched on its sensitivity 2, 3, 4 years ago, say, for example. And the person doesn't really have any sense of there being a problem in that area. The nervous system is not picking up on data. A good way to think about it. Think about a question I sometimes ask people to try and make sense of pain is, have you ever had an annoying boss?
Right.
So, most people have had a boss who's a bit annoying. They're constantly coming in, checking on you. They won't let you get on with your work. In a sense, the boss of the company for a human being is the brain. The brain is the part of your body that makes all those decisions. It's not the ankle or the knee. But from the brain's perspective, from the boss's perspective, all of those different parts of your body are like departments of the company that the boss is in charge of. So the ankle will be one department, the knee will be another department. So if we think about it, for the person who's 90 odd years of age, they may have some arthritic change, which is perfectly normal, just like they'll have wrinkles on their skin, on their face. But the boss is happy with the department of the company, with the knee, because the knee functions well. The knee, we go out running all the time. They're doing training. So the muscles are strong. Everything's working okay. So the boss is happy. The brain is happy with the knee department. And therefore, just like a boss who's happy with a department in a company, they go to the golf course. They don't bother you. And this we know. Patrick Wall, who's one of the classic neuroscientists, Patrick Wall said in the 1970s that ongoing pain, for example, the niggly pain in the knee when you're out running, is less to do with injury, it's less to do with damage, and it's more about your brain's opinion of the body part. So one way to think about this whilst you're out running is think, my brain, my boss, the boss of the company, has an opinion about my shoulder and my elbow and my finger and my wrist and my knee and my ankle. And if those areas are functioning well, if I'm using my shoulder and I'm using my knee and the department's coming back with good results to the nervous system to say, well, look, I've just been out for a run and the muscles are working well and, everything's nice and flexible. I did my stretching and my warm down and my warm up. And then the boss, the brain, tends to be pretty quiet. There's no need to bother that part of the body. But if we start underperforming, if that niggle stops you from running, and then the worry associated with that, that instinctive thing we started off talking about, where we think, well, that must be damage inside the knee, and therefore it stops you from going out as running as much, and it maybe stops you from doing exercise. Very, very quickly, that becomes a problem, because now the boss, the brain, now starts to interpret data, interpret like annual reports from
Mm-hmm.
that part of the body, to say, hang on, you used to perform your job well. The muscles used to be strong, and the joint used to be loose, and now things are tighter and stiffer. And that, in a sense, then perpetuates its own cycle of events, where we, as Eccleston and Crombez, two pain authors, once said, pain is an ideal habitat for worry to flourish. So once we start developing that pain, it's not due to the arthritic changes, but it's due to that boss department of the company relationship. Now, all of a sudden, we start to have other problems where the worry builds. We become more concerned. We start to think, oh God, can I really go and do that 10K run? Am I going to end up in a wheelchair in 10 years? We find other horror stories from previous runners who say, God, don't do that because I ended up in this situation. So I think pain is very, very hard to make sense of unless you're looking at that broad, big picture context. If you're just thinking about the anatomy, it makes no sense.
Right. Okay. Well, I think an example that other runners would be familiar with, and it's kind of similar to what you were just saying. My ankle was bugging me about 3 weeks ago, and there's no races, right? There might be a race this year, and I can just contrast my reaction to it, even consciously. I did not care, I was like, if it hurts a bit, I'll do a bit less tomorrow, But in the past, when I know I'm like 8 weeks from a race or something that I've paid for, I've trained for a year for, my reaction to that ankle pain is drastically different. And I'm just wondering, will the actual ankle pain in that situation for me, would that actually be worse given the worry that is flourishing? Or would it just be that the pain would be the same and the worry would sort of sit on top of it?
Good question, but it's as you say, from based on past experiences, you can notice more pain, and that pain can very well be related to anxiety about performance and all of this hard work I've put in. Am I going to be able to do okay? Whatever other worries. I mean, it might be something completely unrelated to your training. It could be, you've had an argument with somebody, or things aren't going so well at home or work. So there's problems there. So you have to keep your eye on that big picture, because if we don't understand that, if we can't put into context all of the factors that can exacerbate pain, can make pain worse, then it makes no sense. Maybe a good way to do this, and again, a very practical way, because often one of the problems when we're talking about pain, it can all be a bit sort of thinking and rather than doing and feeling. And actually, I think sometimes doing and feeling can actually be a far more powerful experience, rather than just cognition, thinking about it and trying to change your thinking on it. That can be tricky. So maybe we could try something and get people to try something. If we're thinking, do our thoughts impact on our pain? Then there's a really easy way to prove this. For years, ever since the 16th century, there was a French genius philosopher, René Descartes. And Descartes had this idea that the mind and the body were two separate things, that they didn't connect, that they were two very distinctly separate things. We know now, based on huge amounts of evidence, that that's wrong. The mind and the body are very, very well interconnected, which is what was behind what you said before, Matt. Sometimes I find if I'm coming up for a big performance, the worry builds, the pain builds. So a really nice, easy way to do it is sit down on your own sometime when maybe when you go to the toilet or somewhere, and focus on your thumb. It sounds weird. It's an odd thing to do, But if you spend like maybe a couple of minutes somewhere on your own, nice and quiet, put your thumb out in front of you and stare at your thumb and just keep observing your thumb. And it's hard to do now as we're doing this talk, but you know, what you'll find, some people might find that nothing happens, but if you were to do that and pour every ounce of focus and attention into your thumb, you often notice within a minute or two that things start to happen inside there. You get, a whole variety of different things. Some people make an observation that they didn't have before. They notice a freckle that they'd never seen, or when did that wrinkle appear? Some people will notice a sensation. It gets pins and needles or numb, or some people say it changes shape. My thumb felt like it got bigger, or it was throbbing. I could feel my pulse inside there. Now, I ask people when they do that and they have that physical sensation, is that real, or did you imagine that? Was that an imaginary thing that you just did, or did it feel like your thumb was getting bigger, that there were pins and needles? And of course, the answer is no, of course it felt real. And this disproves that idea that the mind and the body are separate. They're very much together. And we had one patient who's an athlete who said to me, we did that experiment together. And she came back a week later when she'd been doing it. And she said two things. First of all, she said, that's not a light bulb moment. That's a chandelier moment, which I love. That this idea that basically, if I think about my thumb, if I sit on the toilet and I think about my thumb, or the kettle's boiling and I think about my thumb, the more I do that, nerves that fire together, wire together, like learning French, the more I do that, the more easy it is for me to make my thumb feel different, to feel sensitive. So for her, the chandelier moment was, she said, well, I'm always thinking about my knee. She had a knee problem as a gymnast. And she's like, I'm always conscious of it being a problem. And it gives her real worries about when I go to the next Olympics, if it goes to head, am I going to end up flat on my backside and the whole world are laughing at me and creating memes about this terrible moment and, where I fell to pieces in performance. And so we have all these worries and all these concerns which feed into the sensitivity of the nervous system. And just thinking about your thumb can make your thumb feel different.
As I was doing it, it started to feel tingly, but then you were saying like about it feeling bigger, and it wasn't so much that it was feeling bigger, but I really had I noticed a strong urge that I didn't want to look at it anymore. Like I didn't like it. Do you know what I mean? It was weird because it was starting to look different. I was noticing little imperfections in it, more the way we often do with our face, right? Like my nose is wonky and this eyebrow's higher, and I was like, oh, I don't like that. I don't like that, and I was like, really keen to look away. And I can imagine like if that was a painful part of my body that was then, threatening to spoil something that was quite important to me, I can imagine that really embedding itself in my perception of the area.
Exactly. And this is the liberating thing. We've had patients who come to see us and they say, that the main overriding message is I feel free for the first time in years, because if you're thinking about your back or your knee or your shoulder being painful because it's injured, or painful because it's old, that it's got degenerative and arthritic, and you hear all those scary words that people say, and doctors sometimes in a rush will say, oh, you've got some signs of some spondylolisthesis, and then of course the first thing we do is find out what that is via Wikipedia, and all these scary things come up. And remember what we said, that pain is an ideal habitat for worry to flourish, and it drives that worry. Those thoughts keep going around, they ruminate, and that again in itself, it sort of leads to more sensitivity in the nervous system, leads to worse performance. Think of a good example if we're thinking about a high level performance. Think about those people who perform at their best. We often show people montage videos of Usain Bolt warming up for an 100-meter Olympic final, or Roger Federer serving tennis balls, or Lionel Messi taking free kicks. What do you notice about these people?
They're chilled.
They're
They look,
chilled, they're
yeah.
relaxed, they're positive. It looks effortless. It looks
Mm,
like Messi looks like a ballerina on a football pitch. It's effortless and easy. And Usain Bolt's listening to music and distracting himself, probably from those worries that we all have. So we know when I've done work with the Olympic Committee on pain management, we know one of the common themes that we see is the people who perform best, those people who win gold medals rather than silver. It's not a case of how well they train their body; it's how well they train their focus. How well they're able to sort of attend to information and block out certain
hmm.
worries and anxieties, and that's all part of this. Whilst I'm thinking about it, I'll share one more story from a patient that we saw, and I think it sums it up beautifully. Um, we did some pain education. We went through some of the concepts that we're talking about today, and then she went away for 6 months and tried living with it and putting into action all of the ideas we've been talking about. She came back 6 months later and she said, I'm doing loads better. I'm doing really, really well. I'm back playing tennis. I'm doing things. So I said, well, how can you explain to me how you're doing better? How's that happened? And she did something really interesting that I always talk to other people about since. She walked over to a window. So she walked over to the window in the gym in the physio department we were in, and she started staring out the window. And she said, "Do you know? Before I could make sense of my pain, before I understood what it was, I used to really worry about it being injury or harm, arthritis, those sort of things." She said it was almost as if, thinking back, it was almost as if I was constantly staring out the window, looking at what was happening to the weather outside. So her focus was 100% of the time, the clouds are moving in from the west and it's got a 30% chance of rain and it's this time of day. And so her focus was so on her pain. It was like a horse with blinkers on running a race. It's just not looking at anything else. And she said the biggest change for her is now that she's understood her pain and made sense of it, which was a challenge, but she worked through that process and shifted the way she looked at it, changed the way you look at things, the things you look at change. She said, now look, I've moved away from the window. I'm not looking at the weather anymore. I'm not focused on my pain, and I'm back doing things. I'm back running, playing tennis, playing with my kids. She said, but when I'm in the middle of a tennis match, sometimes I sit there and think, oh yeah, it is still there. If I really stop and think about it, and I really look for it, like we can stare at our thumb. She said, I can still feel that I've got some back pain, but it's just background noise. It's not stopping me from living my life, from playing sport, from exercising with friends. Whereas in the past, she had stopped because that worry, that attention to the window, to the pain, was such an overriding factor that it got in the way of life.
Mm. And so why then can we not just think it away? My ankle and your ankle, still hurts.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why, if it's a matter of focus and attention and worry, why can we not get it to go away if we want to?
I think one word to say would be, because it wouldn't be wise. It's an evolutionary response. If you think about why, in response to that question, why do I, as a pain scientist, I really like to think that I have a good grasp on the understanding of pain in 2021. Why, when I went out for a run yesterday, did I worry about my ankle? It's because I'm evolved. I'm a human being with an amygdala, that primitive threat system that makes you frightened of snakes and spiders and death and getting old and being in a wheelchair and all those things. These are all normal. So you can't, even though you know about these things, you can't turn it off. A good way to think about it is, I have a friend of mine who's a vet, and she always says, when I work with patients, dogs and cats and rabbits, and they show when they're distressed. If they're not doing well, you can really see when a cat or a dog is not doing well. They display it. But when a human's not doing well, often we have these worries and these anxieties, but we sort of hide it a bit. We wrap it up, and there's a simple rule. I think again, when you're out running, it's a sort of rule to remind yourself of, almost a mantra. If you're low, you hurt more easily. And it's a rule that applies to squirrels and dogs and cats and human beings. And again, a thought experiment to think about this would be, imagine stubbing your toe on the end of the bed at 3 a.m. in the morning. You wake up to go to the bathroom, you stub your toe. Now think about how much that hurts. If you've got man flu, you and I both know what man flu is like, man. So if you're really unwell, if you're really systemically unwell, you've got a really nasty, hideous cold or flu, and you stub your toe on the end of the bed at 4 a.m. or 3 a.m. in the morning, that hurts a lot. But now, if you imagine you do exactly the same thing the following day, you stub your toe on the end of the bed, you've got that horrendous sort of cold still, but you've just found out that you've won $20 million on the lotto. You don't care. You're buying. Your thought is, great. I could buy a new titanium toe. So if you're low, you hurt more easily. Pain makes us vulnerable, and that vulnerability drives that sensitivity and makes us concerned and worried, and which stops us from doing things, which then in turn makes the boss come looking for problems in the knee department or that used to function fine. But the opposite of that rule is true as well. If you're robust, if you're strong, in answer to that question, why does the 90-year-old who has no cartilage left in their knees, why are they running a marathon with a smile on their face? It's partly about perspective, partly about outlook, about perception, the way you view things. And it's partly the fact that due to those things, they've managed to continue to keep functioning at a good level. And they've done things within moderation. Maybe they're not the person who's doing the no pain, no gain, plow through it, make it hurt, it will get better. It's changing a few ways you think and you do. You've got to alter a few things. And we always say nothing changes if nothing changes. It's a case of just adapting something.
Yeah, as you were giving that example of the stubbing the toe, I thought of it's very cold here at the minute, and I'm in like a polar vortex or something, and I take the dog for socks for a walk, and we make it really brief, but I still get very, very cold. And I was getting home yesterday, and he sort of pulled. He wanted to go and sniff something, and it just sort of pulled on my finger a bit. I mean, the pain was negligible, but my reaction was I was so angry, because I was already cold and uncomfortable and I just wanted to get back to the house kind of thing. Yeah. Like it was completely disproportionate to the actual sensation in my finger. And then I was thinking, as you were telling that story, I remember mountain biking once. I was in Whistler, and I'd sort of gone off the beaten path a little bit, and I was going down this hill that was way too hard for me. And I flipped over my handlebars. The bike went up in the air, landed on me, and the cogs hit me in the side of the ribs. It made this big thing that looked like I'd be bitten by a shark. And it really hurt. And I was lying on the floor laughing because I was on my own. And I was like, it's kind of silly, and kind of funny. And that was actually painful wise. It was very painful. And the finger wasn't painful at all, but my reactions to them were very different based on the sort of circumstances.
Yeah, it's a hugely complex and also, we should say, idiosyncratic. My pain is different to your pain, and this is one of the big problems with pain that we've not really touched on yet, is the fact that we like to think that pain is something that you can measure. Healthcare professionals always do this 0 to 10, how much pain are you at the moment, whereas in actual fact, it's a very personal, individual experience. You trying to describe what your pain feels like and what it's like to live with it is like trying to describe what wine tastes like. You can't just say, wine tastes like grapes. It's people have these very nuanced sort of ways of talking about wine, or about, or if I said, well, why do you love your partner? You can't just go, because she or he's really nice. You have, it's really difficult to try and express an experience. And pain is one of those experiences. Pain is a human experience that's really quite difficult to talk about. And that in one sense makes it worse, because when we don't talk about these things, the worry builds. We have these little niggling concerns and doubts that sometimes build up. The other thing to say before I forget is, and we haven't really considered yet, is chemistry. Simple chemistry. I mean, human beings are, animals with bones and muscles and joints, but we also have a chemistry set built inside. And one way to think about this, and it's really important for runners, is we have a drug store, we have a pharmacy inside our brain. And any runner will know about this. The runner's high, the endorphins and the enkephalins and serotonin, and all of these really good pain controllers. They're much better than morphine. In fact, if you look at endorphins, they mimic morphine. So we have these really naturally effective controllers of pain built in. But there's a problem, because if you stop, I know if I stop running, if I can't run for a week or two or whatever it is, we've just had loads of snow here, so I didn't go out for a run for a week or so. It's terrible. I feel low, my mood drops. It's easier for things to hurt. When you're low, you hurt more easily, like we said. And this is because in a sense, all of these really good happy hormones, these effective hormones that we have, which reduce pain, they dry up. The pharmacy closes, if you like. You're not secreting all these amazing, wonderful chemicals that help people win gold medals, and that enable people to escape a battlefield in a war zone where they've had their leg shot off. They'll still run. People who have an arm shot off will still run. They don't notice the arm until later. So this is one of the biggest things I've seen in my 25 years of clinical practice, is particularly with runners and people who ride horses. I would say would be the other group, horse riders. Okay. That there's a huge amount of pleasure gained in running, particularly if you're used to running on a regular basis. There's an enormous amount of pleasure. And one of the problems is if you stop running because you're worried about injury or harm, that pleasure, those happy hormones that we naturally have, they dry up. The drugstore closes. And that then immediately makes that boss, the brain, start looking for problems. It's like a boss who comes checking and going, what's going on? Why isn't this knee doing its job as it used to? You used to go out running 4 times a week, and now you haven't been out for 3 weeks, and you're sat worried, staring at the internet at these jargony words. So all of these things matter. They really do.
Yeah, so it's not just one aspect here. There's a lot of things that can sort of, it's almost like they can sort of trend you towards, less pain and more performance, or trend you towards more pain and less performance, kind of thing, depending on lots of different variables.
That's it. I think it's very easy to see pain as this sort of very binary thing, very simple. Yes, it happens, or no, it doesn't. Another good real story, again, pain is weird. There's lots of weird pain stories out there. One came from the London 2012 Olympics. There was an American 4x400 meter sprinter, Manteo Mitchell. And you can look him up on YouTube. And Manteo Mitchell broke his leg. He's running along the track. He's coming around the bend. I think he was the third guy with the baton. And he broke his leg. And you don't see anything. He continues to keep running and hands the baton over. And it's interesting, if you watch the interview that he gave to the sports journalists after the race, the sports journalist says, you must be a superhero. You broke your leg, but you continue to keep running. And he was like, well, it didn't hurt. It hurts now, but it didn't hurt at the time. And if you think, well, why did that leg not hurt on the track at the final of the London 2012 Olympic Games? I work with some people, some patients, and they'll say, but that's just adrenaline. Surely that's just adrenaline, which is a bit like saying you can make a really delicious gâteau. You can make a really nice award-winning Michelin-starred cake with one egg. The idea of that, of just saying it's just adrenaline, is like saying, well, you could make a really complex cake with one egg. Just throw an egg in a bowl and hey presto, you get a beautiful, chocolate cake. It's one ingredient in that mix. So we cannot make sense of of a pain experience unless you're looking at all the factors that surround it: the culture, your expectations, what your experiences in the past about pain, whether you slept well the night before, have you had sex recently, have you eaten any food, are you hungry? All these things have a big impact.
Yeah, and when you put it like that, this, and I think that story quite nicely illustrates what I was hoping to get to today, which is this. It's not as simple as the more damage you have, the more pain you have, and that there is a lot more going on when you feel pain. And I think that story with the runner illustrates that quite nicely. And I think that the thing to remember when you hear those stories, because I've heard others, right? It's not that they were in horrendous pain and pushed through it because they're very brave. It's that it didn't hurt. They didn't know it was there, or they only felt a small amount of pain, so they carried on because they didn't know.
Exactly. Yeah, it's not advantageous for Mantio Mitchell to drop to the ground and have pain in that moment. It's not to his advantage as an organism, as a human being, as an animal. And that's not a conscious thing. He's not thinking, I've broke my leg, but I won't stop. At a subconscious level, the brain is constantly interpreting information. It's constantly seeking out warning signals. So one way to think of the brain might be to think of it like a grandparent or a parent. It's constantly, if you're a parent or a grandparent, or even if you don't have kids, I don't have kids, but I've got nieces and nephews. And, if I'm looking after a child, I'm constantly scrutinizing every situation. I'm looking at where's the danger coming from? Is there a problem in the road? Is there this? So your brain, our brain, is constantly scrutinizing every single situation, and without you even thinking about it, because the brain processes about 4 million pieces of data every minute. You can't be in charge of all that. But you're processing that information. And if the brain thinks there's a threat here, there's something, that I need to be aware of, then we get an output. We get a sensation, we get pain, or we get muscle spasm, and it's wrong for us to think of those things as a useful indicator of damage or harm. So a better way to maybe think about it would be, if you get a muscle spasm when you're out for a run, or the day after, it's not damage or harm, but it's maybe that parent or grandparent pulling the reins on a little. If you're looking after a 3-year-old toddler and they keep running for the road, you put them on reins. And if they keep running for the road, you pull those reins hard, that you make it tense. So it's a protective response, not terrible damage that's going to end you up in a dreadful situation where you can't run.
Yeah, I think that metaphor of the parent, I think, different ways of explaining it resonate with different people. That really works for me when I heard that explanation, because then I thought, well, if you had a kid and they sort of wandered off in the mall one time, and you lost them for like 2 hours, and it was really terrifying. What are you going to be like going to the mall with that kid in the future? You're going to be a nightmare. You're going to be an absolute helicopter parent. You won't let them out your sight. You'll put them on reins even till they're like 18 years old. You just won't forget. And I think that happens sometimes especially with like traumatic injuries, right? So, you twist your knee running and you don't end up running for another 3 months. And then that knee bothers you forever, and I think that might be part of what's happening there. Is that fair?
Very much so, yeah. I think, there's again, a general rule for human beings, which is people aren't distressed by things, they're distressed by their view of things, by their perception, by how they view it and perceive it. So a good example would be, the amount of times that we get people who they haven't bent with back pain for 3 or 4 years. They haven't put their shoes and socks on. Their wife's putting their shoes and socks on. And obviously, based on the conversation we're having, this isn't good, because now you've got a department of the company, the back, that's gradually becoming stiffer and weaker and tighter, where it used to function fine, thank you very much, now it's not. And as a result, the boss, the sensitive nervous system, now starts looking for more and more problems in that area. And it might then start looking in other departments of the company for other issues. So before we know it, we seem to have pain all over the place. And, people say, oh, God, it started here and now it's gone here and I've got it all over the place. So, yeah, I think, it's important to consider that bigger picture of how these things really impact on us in our life. We have to think about all of the things that we've been considering, mood, whether you're happy and content, whether there's some worry. Now, what impact does that have? What does your beliefs do to it? What does your culture do to it? Past experiences. So, for example, the person who can't bend to pick up their shoe and sock, and their wife's been doing that. We would say it's not the bending that's the issue. It's how you view the bending, or it's not the going out for a run for the issue. So, if you think about it in the past, when you're a kid, bending was the same thing, but you never thought about it. You just bent. You just bent and picked up a ball and you played with your friends and you did stuff. Bending was bending. It's exactly the same thing that it is now if you're 45 with a 10-year history of back pain. What's changed is your view based on negative experiences. I tried doing this and it made it worse. And, so it's the perception and the experience that makes the situation worse. But as a thing, running or bending is no different. It's exactly the same. It's a tricky one to get your head around, but it's important that we do.
And I think as well, I've heard you talk about experience, learning from experience, and like the example with the back pain for a long time, and that they don't bend because it hurts, and they're scared of bending because it hurts a lot. It's no good just talking about bending. They've got to start to engage with it, and then reflect on it, and then do it again, and then reflect on that, and then sort of have a bad experience and come through it, and then have a good experience and carry on. And it's sort of a process. It's not something that you can just, so if we take it back to the knee pain example, I can't just explain, pain and damage is separate and all these things, share this podcast with them to help explain it. And then expect that the next time they run, when they get to 10K, their knee won't hurt anymore, because they'll probably will, and if she's going to move beyond it, there is a process to go through, a process of experience as well as learning cognitively as well.
There is, and I love this idea that I'm an educator, and Dewey, who's a godfather of educational theory, he once said, we don't learn by experience, we learn by reflecting on experience. So it's only when you actually having the experience is one thing, learning from it is really another. So I'll give you an example. We've spoken about how pain is not linked as much to damage as we used to think, but it's more about threat, and it's more about this big picture of worries, concerns, anxieties, sensitivity, all these things that throw themselves into the mix there. And that's perfectly normal for a human being or a squirrel, but I think the thing that we've got to really start considering is how can we use experience to make sense of it and overcome it? So, for example, we see people who, let's take bending with your back again. We take people who they can't bend. They'll say, I can't do this. This is, it's going to, my disc's going to explode out my back. We have all these concerns and worries that we've been having. But so they find it physically impossible to bend. But then if as a physio, we know that if we can find ways of tricking people, if we can get ways of tricking the nervous system into doing that activity that they don't think they can do without recognizing the threat, if we can disguise the threat, if you're scared of snakes and I throw a snake at you, you're not going to like it. But if I can disguise that snake inside a bag and say, oh, could you just hold my bag here for a minute? Then you're fine. So what we often do is we'll disguise, we'll mask the threat of bending with the back or the threat of running on a treadmill by disguising it as something else. So, for example, with somebody who can't bend, we might start getting them to go into positions where they're like being like a dog having a stretch with their back, and we'll do silly dog noises and dog movements and scratch our ears and this and just purely as a bit of fun and distraction. But it's interesting that suddenly people find that they can do things, they can function without the spasm, without the pain, without the worry. And when you stop and think about that, there's that moment from people often where they go, this is weird. What's that about? And it's only through that experience that you can suddenly now go, this is this threat thing we're talking about.
Right.
If the brain doesn't see the threat of pretending to be silly like a dog on the floor and using your back fully and bending, then you can do things. If the answer to the question is how dangerous is this from your brain's point of view, and the answer is it's not that dangerous, I'm just on the floor being a dog and playing around and doing stupid, then it doesn't do it. No. And interestingly, I've got a colleague of mine, a doctor in Spain. He's a doctor, has been for 20 odd years, but he also is a trained magician. And it's interesting because he uses magic tricks to help people understand pain perception. So we can use fun, creative experiences like we did with our thumb, for example, rather than thinking about it. I think thinking about it sometimes, information doesn't really change the way we do things and the way we think.
Yeah, it's like they say with kids, they learn from your example. They don't, you telling them stuff, it just goes in one ear and out the other. They kind of have to live it with you, kind of thing. When you were talking about
That's it.
The back pain, it really reminded me, and I'd forgotten about this, but was it last week or the week before? I had a lady come in. She's been coming for a few weeks, and the first time she came, the first thing we did, she handed me a sheet, and it was an MRI report. She'd had knee pain for like 3 or 4 years and going up the stairs hurt, so she would do this sort of funny one at the step at the time thing. And there was a chondral defect on her tibia, which is a sign of arthritic change for the listeners. And it was quite big. And, I tried to get her to do a step up in the assessment, and she couldn't because it hurt too much. I tried to get her to do like a lunge, and that hurt too much. And anyway, we got on with our therapy, which was a variety of like strengthening exercises and that kind of stuff, avoiding those positions because they hurt. So we did other stuff, other exercises.
Mm-hmm.
And just last week, I was just reassessing, and I got her to do a lunge and a step up, and they didn't hurt at all. And I was like, hang on, didn't they hurt loads like the first time you couldn't do them, right? And she sort of looked at me sort of quizzically and said, oh, yeah. And I was like, does it hurt to walk upstairs? And she was like, no. And she hadn't noticed. And I think the thing is as well, looking at the MRI, and I think this is an important part for all of us, because I, like everybody else, looked at it and thought, we're not going to do so well here. I couldn't help it. I'd never met her. Or the first thing I did was read this report because she handed it to me and I knew she wanted me to read it. But I was in the sort of tram line there of, we'll see. We probably won't get that far. But then within 3 or 4 weeks, she's doing the two main things that bothered her, which was sort of getting up and down and going up and down stairs. And it doesn't hurt anymore. And I can only presume that if we took another MRI, it's not going to look any different. It won't look better.
No, and this is, you've just touched on a really good point there, Matt. I mean, quite often, we'll get people who they're transfixed, and quite rightly so, by what the scan shows. And often this can be a problem in our culture, that we often think that pain is something where we can find the magic holy grail off button. This is why, obviously that thing of, if we remove the part that hurts with surgery, that it's like removing a dodgy bit out of an old car. You replace it with a new bit and you're all good. But human beings aren't cars, and healthcare professionals aren't mechanics. It's way too simplistic to think of things in those terms. So yeah, I think, we keep coming back to keep thinking about that big picture. And the big picture for an MRI scan like that would be, I often say to people, oh, look, imagine if we begin working together and we get those departments of your company functioning at a better level. So the boss goes back to the golf course.
Mm-hmm.
So that, the brain goes, well, okay, fine, I'm back getting stronger, which is essentially what you were describing with your patient. She started to move. It was pain-free, fun movement. The nervous system's going, oh, this is good. This is what my body's designed to do. If we do that through a process of rehabilitation and training, and gradually increase it, a bit like somebody who climbs Everest will acclimatize and gradually increase their tolerance to those levels of the mountain, you gradually go up, you go down a bit, you go up a bit, you go down a bit, but you reach a point where your body is physically doing really well and your nervous system as a result is much quieter. If you came along and repeated that MRI scan again after that process, if you did the scan again 6 months later, the scan won't look any different. It's not that, the scan's going to look like wonderful, like when you were 7 years of age. You're still going to look 52 years of age on the inside, just like you do on the outside. And that, in a sense, it goes to prove the point. I love it when patients get that, because I always say, how do you think your scan's going to look if we did another scan in 8 months after you've been doing all this rehab? And those that really get it, they understand that, of course, it'll look the same, but I'll be different.
Mm-hmm.
That's the difference there.
And that can be a hurdle sometimes, because people are like, well, that lady could have said, well, how is doing exercises going to help with this condyle defect in my knee? And you get that sometimes, don't you, with people? They don't see at all how we can help them, because we are not surgeons. We're not going to fix what they perceive the problem to be, which is the structural change. But that doesn't mean that we can't fix the real problem, which is the fact that it hurts when she goes up and down stairs.
Yeah, this is it. This is exactly the problem. We always say, that the problem isn't the problem, the solution is the problem. And the problem with how people think about pain, and it's so normal and instinctive, when you're in pain, all you do is think about pain and and you worry about what it is. I do it. Everyone else does it. It would be, you could argue, abnormal not to do it. So I think that, if you take your focus, if you put all of your focus into why is this hurting, and you don't get answers to that question, or the answers to that question are based in how we used to think about pain in like the 1970s or 80s, which is it's coming from the damage to your knee or your back, then you're on a hiding to nothing, because that's a really pessimistic long-term viewpoint that you're just going to get gradually worse, and one day you're going to meet a surgeon who's going to have to replace it, and then you've got this high expectation that when the surgeon does give you the new bit, that you'll function like a brand new motor car. And of course, the reality of the situation is that's not the case often. The results for surgery for these problems are not great. And, it proves the point, in a sense, that why are these results not very good? It's because we're doing something to the part of your body that hurts, but that's not the area, that's not why it hurts. Another way to think about this would be, I'm sure lots of people listening are aware of people who've lost a limb, of phantom limb pain. There's a great example. We see people who, they're so desperate to get rid of their leg pain that they'll have their leg chopped off. I've met people who've made that really dramatic decision, and then they're hugely disappointed a year or two later because the pain hasn't gone. They can still feel the pain in their foot, which isn't there anymore. So, think about that. It's, again, it's like thinking about your thumb. Even though you've lost that body part, or you've got a new bit from surgery, you still have the brain that's been processing that information for years and has learned it like you could learn French or how to make a spaghetti bolognese.
And that's trying to think about that, because it's one thing to know, okay, there's this weird thing called phantom limb pain, but it's another thing to really reflect on it and think, well, how does that work? How can something hurt if it's not there? Well, it must mean that the pain wasn't in the foot because the foot's not there. Do you know what I mean? So, and then trying to wrap your head around that and what that means is it's trickier than just sort of acknowledging phantom limb pain as this weird thing. But it happens in other parts of the body too, where they have tears in the rotator cuff that they stitch up, or they have meniscal tears that they remove, or they have disc bulges that they remove, and spines that they stabilize, and the pain ends up exactly the same. And it's because that's not where the pain was. And my understanding is that surgery generally doesn't work that well for pain. Works very well for function sometimes, but not that well for pain in most of the reading I've done.
Well, it's one of the problems, and again, it's a cultural problem. You have the same cultural issue that we have here in the UK as you do in Canada, that pain is often seen in the West as like a war that you fight. We do the same thing with cancer. We fight against cancer. We battle. You can see this through the language that we use, stabbing, shooting, burning, throbbing pain. The words, the metaphors we use to describe our pain, they're all battling sort of
We don't
things.
call it helpful or informative, or it's not looking after us or keeping us safe. It's trying to kill us.
It's trying to kill us. It is. It's we call it the language of agency. We in the healthcare world, we use words like gradual, insidious onset. I mean, there are horror movies. People say it crept up on me. My pain crept up on me, like it's some sort of evil devil. When we get people to draw what their pain would look like, we'll say, well, what would your pain look like if you were to draw it? And the amount of times that people will draw something evil, a devil attacking them or doing things. And the problem with this way of thinking is it really sort of gives us this what one person calls, Arthur Frank called, the restitution narrative, that I'm broken today, but you will fix me and I'll be perfect again tomorrow. It's a very Western preoccupation that, we will overcome the pain problem. Western healthcare will solve the issue. Surgery will resolve this and I'll be right as rain. And it's not the case. I mean, in fact, if we think about back pain, here in the UK, we have a recognized medical term called failed back surgery syndrome. People who've had, 2 or 3 lots of back pain surgery, when the back pain is still there or it's got worse because somebody's been jabbing at you with a knife, you're then diagnosed with failed back surgery syndrome, which is essentially the surgeon's way of saying, I did a good job, but you failed as a patient. So this idea of seeing, painkillers to kill the pain, where pain control is a better word. To control the pain is a better way of thinking about it. It's interesting historically as well. Historian Joanna Bork looked at this, and she said that in the past, we in the Western world used to see pain as something that you sort of got on with. So here in the UK, we in the past, in the Victorian days, would have had a touch of lumbago. They would have called it a touch of lumbago, and then you'd get back down the pits to the mine, back working again and doing things. Now we have a problem. We don't have a touch of lumbago. We have chronic degenerative disc disease in your back, and it leads to people dropping out of work, and then the boss really, well, physically and metaphorically, the boss starts to get into trouble, or there's a problem. So this idea that to fight the war on pain, we begin with the small troops. We often start with the tablets and the paracetamols and stuff, and if they don't win the war, we essentially scratch the itch, and then the itch comes back. If the paracetamol doesn't win the war, then we escalate the war. We bring in the tank division, the physios. Then we go for the injections and the MRI scans, the fighter jets. And eventually, of course, you end up with the surgeon with the nuclear warhead. And this is a really unhelpful sort of way of thinking about healthcare. It's not how other parts of the world think. It's not how they think in South America or in Asia, for example. I see very different ways of thinking. For example, when I was teaching in Brazil, there was a Brazilian physio who said they'd been working in Paris for a while, and they said French people were really weird, Mike, because they kept saying, my pain, it hurts here, and it's 7 out of 10, and it's achy and it's sharp. So a bit like we were just staring at our thumb or staring out the window, he said all these French people, that all they kept doing was thinking about their pain. It's like they were just so focused on their pain all the time. He said back home, here in Brazil, they come in and say, I'm struggling to do this. So they're focusing on function, on I can't pick up my kid, or I can't go out for a run, or I can't. But it's not the pain that's the focus. It's the, as we said, the problem isn't the problem. The solution is the problem. How do I focus on, how do I get back to work or sport or running or whatever it is?
Yeah. And I think sometimes we get stuck in I'll go back to all that stuff when I get rid of the pain. And it's focusing on the pain instead of focusing on the impact of the pain and what the pain means and how to change the impact of the pain to be more in line with the way we want our life to be, which is I want to be able to run. I don't want my knee to hurt. I want to be I want to be able to do my 10K 3 times a week or whatever it is. Let's talk about that.
Yeah. Well, it's a really interesting point because the people, generally speaking, the people I see who do best, have a really good outcome with physiotherapy, with all sorts of different pains, regardless of how long it's been there. They often get better, and you say, well, how are you better? And like the lady who said, I've stopped looking out the window, metaphorically speaking, they'll often say, well, I'm back playing tennis and I'm back doing sport and I'm back doing things. And then you ask them another question, which is, well, how's the pain? And they go, oh, good question. I've not really thought about it. And that's the point. They've shifted. They've found a way of shifting that attention, shifting that focus, and they've poured their energy and their efforts into, what do I do about this? What are the solutions? What are the physical things I can do? They make sense of their pain and then they move beyond it quickly. Whereas if we go down that road of worrying about pain and not having a meaningful explanation as to why it's there, not having some knowledge in place, then it's a problem, because without the knowledge there are very few foundations. They're very rocky foundations that you can build your rehab on. So the knowledge and the understanding and having meaning for why it's there is a really crucial part of it. That's often it's often seen as by people living with pain. I get the feeling sometimes that they often feel it's not essential. Often patients will say, well, when do we start the treatment? They think of treatment as actually physically prodding and pushing on that knee and doing massage and putting machines on. But without the knowledge, without the understanding and the meaning that you need, all of those treatments tend to be a bit short-term, quick fix. You scratch the itch, but it doesn't actually make a big difference.
Yeah, because what you're really looking for is a change in that person's life. They don't come in because they want, something done to their knee. They come in because they want their life to be different, and part of that might be having to learn to understand what is happening with the knee and what is not happening. I think that's
the relevance and the irrelevance of the knee.
Yeah, I think that's a really nice place. I'm conscious that we've gone on for quite a while now, but it was super interesting. So I feel like I could keep talking for another 2 hours, but I don't want to keep you all afternoon. So
I could talk. They call people like me painiacs, people who like pain and studying pain. Oh yeah. Oh, it's ask my wife. We'll sit there on holiday when we used to have holidays, that is, before COVID. I'll sit there reading books on this subject, but I'm fascinated. I find it. I have to say that when I first went into the world of healthcare, like I've always wanted to do that physio job, I actually found the work really quite dull. It was when it used to be, this is where pain comes from. It's the knee, and if you do this to the knee, that the problem gets better. And it was very formulaic and recipe based, and actually. Thinking back, the results that we used to achieve they're not that good. We know this. I mean, if you're talking about learning from experience, ask a healthcare professional who's been on the road for a good while. The training that we received did not lead to good results, because there was a study done here in the United Kingdom that found that in 2012, 99% of all of the learning that doctors and nurses and physios and osteopaths and those people get is anatomy, biomechanics. And when you spend all that time learning about muscles and joints and all of this technical stuff about the anatomy, it's no wonder that we then have a bias towards thinking and talking and educating about those things, which then perpetuates the problem, because by focusing on the anatomy and those problems, we make all of the other problems, the worries, the concerns, the distress, we make those worse. And it's those things that are the biggest indicators of a bad outcome, of a poor prognosis in the future.
Yeah. And then that's where we have to be careful, right? Because we can be part of the problem. And, you know, in some cases, it's not always, but you can get instances where the person who comes in can't run because of their knee, they would have been better off just kind of getting on with it. And they actually, from
very much
engaging
so.
with the healthcare system, they end up taking, you know, they end up doing less, they end up being more fearful, they end up having more unhelpful beliefs about their knee because of the scans that were done, you know, and their actual trajectory can be sent down a very negative road. And that's something we have to be careful of. And for the listeners, it's, you know, are you heading in a direction that you're happy with? Are you going where you want to? You might be, you know, heading down the sort of a more structurally biased path that is not taking into consideration the other aspects of your pain or your problem.
Oh, it definitely. I mean, definitely. It's I think we have to always keep that context, that big picture view, and something we see in sport all the time. We see whenever you work with elite athletes and elite sports people, they often talk about their experiences with healthcare, and actually, what you see is not very good, because in elite sport, often these people are not seen as human beings. They're seen as a very expensive piece of machinery. They're seen as a piece of expensive kit. So if the expensive piece of machinery, if I don't know, Tom Brady, is it the American football player? If he's out injured, then whoever his team are, as a business, as an industry, have reduced productivity. So it's like a business buying a very expensive piece of machinery, expensive piece of kit. Whereas in actual fact, of course, athletes are human beings. And all of these things that we're talking about, you could argue, are somewhat magnified in that intense scenario, that intense situation of elite performance with 5 billion people watching you at an Olympic event or a World Cup final. Or so, there's I think we have to consider where we've gone wrong. And sport is definitely one of those places where, there's been far too much very passive care, wrapping people up in cotton wool, treating them as vulnerable, fragile, which then perpetuates and makes the problem worse.
Yeah. And that's my last episode was with Dr. Murph Travers, was on exactly that concept of sort of fragilizing people. And I think you're right. I've noticed the better the athlete, when I come across them, the more unhelpful beliefs they have about their body and the more unhelpful information they have.
Yeah. I mean, Ben Darlow, who's a Kiwi researcher, pain researcher, he spent some time asking the general public about the back. What do you think about the back? What do you think about back pain? And the title of his study gives away the findings: easy to harm, hard to heal. So people, generally speaking, and I'm sure this is not just in New Zealand, it's all over the world, people generally speaking have two notions about the spine, about the back: that it's easy to cause harm, that it's mind your back, all that sort of stuff. You only get one back, once it's gone, that's it. And hard to heal. Once it's gone, it's not coming back again. It's damaged forever. And we know, I mean, the evidence shows that these are what's the in vogue comment? Alternative facts, alternative truths. In other words, fake news. It's a belief, but it's a belief that's not based in science. It's not based in evidence. And maybe the situation we've lived with COVID shows the importance of evidence and science. And I think when we think about pain, we have to keep our view on what does the science show? What do we understand about this? And then interpret that based on our own personal experiences. So I would leave you with one final thing, which is always think about, have you had a weird pain experience in the past? Because when you're in pain, it's easy to become so convinced, as we started today by talking, that you've got some damage or some harm inside there. You visualize and you catastrophize what's happening inside the ankle in my situation. But actually, if you think back, you can often think about some sort of weird experience, even years ago, that you had that doesn't seem to make sense when you think about pain linking to damage or harm. I'll give you a quick example. Some of the hardest patients to work with are healthcare professionals, because we have all of this knowledge about, like we said, 99% of our time is spent thinking about anatomy and learning all of where the origins and insertions of muscles are and which nerve, So we spend all our time thinking about anatomy. So I was working with a GP, with a doctor, and she was convinced that her pain was coming from damage to her disc in her back. And she's a runner. It had stopped her from running. And I was thinking, how can I help this person? So we started talking about, have you ever had any weird experiences, any experiences that don't seem to fit with your understanding of pain, with what the textbooks have taught you over the years? And we sowed the seed. She thought about it. She came back a week later and she said, yeah. She said, when I was 14, I went on holiday. I was running with my friends along the beach, and I was so competitive and determined to get to the end and win the race along the beach that she won. And then she looked down at the floor, and all her friends were sort of, being sick, and there was blood everywhere. And she'd stood on a glass bottle, and there was, blood pouring out of her foot. So there was blood everywhere. The beach was a bloodbath. She had a smile on her face. She said, I was like so intent on winning this race, like Mantio Mitchell at the London 2012 Games. I was so intent on winning that race against my friends as a teenager that I didn't notice the fact that I'd stood on a glass bottle. It was only afterwards. So sometimes, think about how pain is weird, and think about those personal, meaningful experiences that you might well have had in the past. And try and use that experience to think about what we've been discussing today.
And for our listeners, is there anywhere they could find you if they wanted to hear more from you and learn a little more about this?
Yeah, I have a website, so www.knopain.co.uk, and know is spelled Know. So Know pain, pain.co.uk. And there you'll find there's a resources section. A big aim of mine over the years has been to have a space where people can share experiences, and clinicians and patients to sort of talk about what they've experienced with their pain and how they've been helped, and what cul-de-sacs they went down. They went down dead ends and tried treatment strategies that didn't have any meaningful impact for them. So go to the website. You'll find a mix of stuff, really, podcasts, videos. There's so much out there these days that it's knowing where to look sometimes, and finding a clinician or somebody who will signpost you in the right direction. So hopefully the website is designed to signpost people towards the latest evidence.
Yeah, I've certainly had bars around there, and personal recommendation I would give is you've got the podcast that you've done previously on there, which I honestly, not because you've just done the show, but I think they're some of the best podcasts I've ever listened to. They are hugely helpful.
Oh, thanks very much.
You talk, some of them are, more for clinicians, but even so, I feel like you talk about it in a way that pretty much everyone can understand, with the odd little bit of jargon, because they might be for clinicians, but you can still understand the underlying meaning. And there's a lot in there that we didn't get into today. So I would certainly encourage people to check those out. And I do have some listeners who are clinicians and stuff as well. And I can certainly recommend your course if you ever get to do it live again. I don't know if you've got an online version.
Yeah, I've been teaching online courses, which is good fun. But yeah, I'm looking forward to getting back into classrooms with people and having lots of discussions and experiments and things. But yeah, the world is where we are at the moment. It's a weird place. So, but I think I think COVID has actually taught us a lot about some of these subjects we've looked at. What the impact that sort of situations and ongoing anxieties and concerns have on people generally, and what that does to the nervous system and how we think.
Hmm.
Yeah, I've personally found it quite hard. It's been a really hard, challenging year.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's certainly something we can all we all got our own little. It's strange with COVID because this is the first time, especially when it first started. I remember thinking about. I was listening to music, and I remember thinking the person who's singing right now, like this superstar, is probably sitting at home worrying about COVID. Like this is the first time I can ever think where we're all thinking about the same thing. It's
Yeah.
a very strange situation.
Well, again, it comes back to that idea that, in sport, often athletes feel, elite sports people feel like they're treated like a machine, like they're not a
Mm,
human. I'm a big football fan. My football team, Liverpool, have not been doing so well at the moment. And you sort of sit there and think, well, no wonder. I mean, think of the impact that these things have, that the world, performing in an empty stadium,
mm,
that in itself, you take away what we were speaking about, those happy hormones that help you to perform better, those endorphins and kephalins, the runner's high. If you were used to getting that huge high from 50,000 people cheering you on
mm,
or booing you or either way, now you don't have it. So
mm,
it's again, we cannot make sense of pain and performance, whether that's at an elite level, whether that's somebody just going out for 5K fun runs. We can't make sense of these things in isolation.
mm.
You have to join the dots and look at that big picture.
And that's exactly what I wanted to talk about today, to just try and, when people listen to the other episodes, if we start talking about pain, to sort of have something to signpost to, because it's not as simple as um, just running technique, for example. There's so much other stuff going on that it's
Mm.
important that everybody, it's not just people who have pain problems, it's everyone, because we all feel pain sometimes and we all get injured sometimes. We have to have a little bit of an understanding how this what this experience is, and importantly what it's not.
Mm. Well, and with that in mind, I think it's crucial. We haven't said about this, but what it's not is we've been talking about pain perception and the brain's take on threat, like the parent or the boss checking on problems. But when we do this, the downside of talking about pain perception often in clinical practice is that, of course, if you're living with pain and you're in agony and it's in your knee and you can feel it in your knee, then in one sense, it sounds like the clinician is saying that it's all in your head.
Mm,
That if you can just think happy thoughts and that the pain will get better, and that it's not real, it's an imaginary thing, and it's all based in what you're doing here. And that's a tricky one because we know that it's real. We know these experiences are real. It's not that you're faking it or imagining it or thinking about it, but it's really important to grasp that when we talk about pain perception, we're not saying that it's some sort of thing that you're considering, that you're thinking about.
mm,
It's a process that's learnt and wires itself in over time and is a subconscious thing, like we've been talking about with all of these experiences and anecdotes and stories. So it's very, very real. It's as real as your thumb felt
mm,
tingly and throbby, and it's that real. Yeah, it's as real as that time where you're lying in bed and you suddenly feel like you're about to fall off a cliff. That moment where you suddenly go, "Oh
yep.
God, I'm about to fall off me." That's threat perception. That's real. You can't stop it. Just like you can't stop your heart beating or your pancreas doing things. It's just your body doing what it does. But um, I think a really important thing to leave you with, Mark Twain once said, courage is resistance to fear, mastery of fear, not absence of fear.
Mm,
So You might be somebody who runs regularly and you've listened to our chat today and you're thinking, oh, great, I can now, run without any concern, any worry. But that's not the case at all. As Mark Twain says, it's about mastery, not absence. When I go out for a run, I'm dressed for my run. When I go out for my run in a minute, I may well have that ankle pain that returns, and I might well have those worrying thoughts that spring into my head and those visions of what's happening to the tendon. But actually, it's whether you can master that and overcome it and continue to keep performing. That's the trick.
And I think that's
whether you can eradicate it.
Yeah, that's a lovely place to leave it, because you're right. You often get, when I've talked about some of the more complicated aspects of pain with people, they often think I'm trying to say it's in their head. And it's like you said, when I run a couple of weeks ago and my ankle was hurting, I know it wasn't in my head, but I also know it wasn't damage in my ankle. It's not quite, that's a sort of false black and white. It's not that simple. And I think that's a really important point to make, is that it's not what you're saying. That's not what I'm saying. It's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about how there's lots of different aspects to pain, not just what you see on an x-ray.
Very much so. But I think that's a crucial point to bring up, because it's something that we know is the question, the challenging question of our time when we're talking about pain and perception, rather than just talking about our old version of pain, which is damage to tissues.
Mm-hmm.
The real problem is, and I'm sure there'll be people who are listening to this who have felt like that when you go to see a clinician. You felt like the clinician didn't believe you. And it's quite a common occurrence. It's quite a common problem. And a lot of my work with clinicians is trying to help them find ways to help patients feel believed. Because again, we know if you don't feel believed with this, if you don't feel validated with these things, and you do think that someone's saying it's in your head, then it makes the problem worse. You don't get better.
Okay, well, let's end there. Thank you very much again, Mike. That was extremely informative, and I will do my best to get it out there to as many people as I can.
Thanks, Matt, and I hope people find it helpful and it helps them to continue and keep enjoying their running.
All right, well, you're off for a run now?
I'm off for a run now. Yeah, I'm a slow, ploddy 5K along the coast.
Okay.
I live by the coast, so I've got a nice coastal run. The snow and the ice has finally melted, so I can go out without. There we go. Another worry about whether I'm going to slip over and fall in the ice. So it's finally cleared, so I can relax and perform better, hopefully.
Well, enjoy your run. Thank you again for your time, and hopefully we'll get to meet again someday.
Cheers, Matt. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, bye.